So, moving on to the next concept. I'm going to talk about some of the different perspectives you can try to use when you're analyzing something. Because like I said, one of the things you can do is take these different perspectives. The first perspective is kind of a pair of opposing perspectives, the Doylist and the Watsonian. Let me ask a question. Who wrote Sherlock Holmes? Huh? Arthur. Arthur Conan Doyle. That is correct. It is also wrong. Watson wrote the Sherlock Holmes stories. If you read the Sherlock Holmes stories, they are, in the story, Watson publishing accounts of his real-life adventures with Sherlock Holmes. But in our world, they're a bunch of fiction written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And that's where in Sherlock Holmes fandom and criticism, Sherlock Holmes, by the way, has a serious claim to being the oldest fandom. Sherlock Holmes fans are just as obsessed as fans of anything else, and they've been doing it since the 19th century. And they named these two perspectives. The Doylist perspective on a text looks at it from outside, as an artificial work created in a real-world context. And all the characters and events are created by an author, by a production team, by whoever. The Watsonian perspective looks at it from within, as if it's its own reality. And all the characters and events are real. In a Doylist perspective, the characters do what they do because the author told them to. In a Watsonian perspective, the characters do what they do because they have motivations of their own, feelings of their own, and so forth. Case in point, the last two episodes of Neon Genesis Evangelion. Doylist perspective, studio was low on money, had to save, cut the budget, so they made some really cheap-ass episodes. Watsonian perspective, common one is Shinji is trying to understand something that is beyond human comprehension, and that mess is what he gets. This is not like a binary. It's not you have to be Doylist or you have to be Watsonian. It's a spectrum. You have, and as we get into the other views, you'll see, you have views that are a little Doylist, you have views that are a lot Doylist, you have views that are a little Watsonian, you have views that are a lot Watsonian. So let's move on to the next one. Psychological perspectives. This is basically taking a look at the characters. What drives them? What makes them do what they do? What are their personalities? What can they teach us about the way people think in real life? How do they reflect theories on the way people think in real life? You know, Freudian perspectives have a lot of effect, impact here. Jungian perspectives have a lot of impact here. Lots of other psychologists who've been discredited in real-world psychology have a lot of impact here. But that's okay, because we're talking about fictional characters, so it's okay if their psychology is interesting rather than accurate. For example, I probably should have said this at the beginning, there's going to be spoilers in this panel. Expect Evangelion spoilers, expect some Madoka spoilers, expect some very minor spoilers for anything else that pops in my head. I will try to warn ahead of time. So, Madoka spoiler, cover your ears if you haven't seen it, and plan to. You can view the magical girls in Madoka as exploring different responses to child abuse. Kyoko oscillates back and forth between acting out in denial. Homura detaches and tries to shut down her emotions. Sayaka becomes violent and self-destructive. Psychological views tend to be very Watsonian. You're looking at the motivations of the characters. But they're not completely Watsonian, because sometimes you will get a little bit, it's not really polite, but sometimes you'll get a little bit to psychoanalyzing the author. People do this all the time. I keep going back to it because it's the single anime that's had the most analysis applied to it. People do this all the time with Evangelion. They make it about Anno's psychological state. It's probably not accurate that it's about that, but people love to do that. They love to apply this approach. Another kind of approach you can take is like historical and cultural perspectives. You can look at the time and place the work was created and see how it reflects the concerns and ideas and controversies of its day. You can ask, what were the trends in this genre at that time, and how did the work reflect them, or how did it criticize them, or how did it reject them? For example, Sailor Moon. Sailor Moon took the traditionally very feminine Mahou Shoujo genre, and it added in Sentai elements. The girls kick and punch a lot more. They have a team of color-coded heroes. They're much more physically involved than in previous magical girl shows, and there's much more of a combat and action focus as opposed to, solving people's emotional problems. You can argue that there was a whole trend in the 90s of blending shonen and shoujo elements, adding shoujo elements to shonen shows. For example, Slayers is a shonen show with a girl as the main character. Adding, things like Sailor Moon that added shonen elements to shoujo shows. This is usually a doylist approach. You're looking at it from outside, you're looking at the history of the world around the show. A lot of anime has a lot to do, for example, with actually going outside anime. Godzilla, very much about post-World War II Japan. Post-World War II Japan is the only time and place that could have produced Godzilla. So this tends to blend in with the next one, which is social and values criticism. How does the work reflect the social and political structures and conflicts of its time and place? Or how can it be applied to the social, political structures and conflicts of the viewer's time and place? What values does the work express and explore? There's a lot of schools within social and values criticism. There's a Marxist school of criticism. There's feminist criticism. There's queer criticism. There's any political movement you can think of has its own form of this. For example, Cardcaptor Sakura turns out to be really interesting from a queer criticism point of view. Most Clank works do, but Cardcaptor Sakura is the one I'm most familiar with. Because it depicts more than one relationship that is not boy and girl. This tends to blend the doylist and Watsonian perspectives because it tends to be very much about the values and relationships and so forth among the characters, but it also tends to be a lot about real-world politics and social issues and that kind of thing. The next thing I have on there is not a true perspective, but it's a very important idea. This is something you see people arguing against, usually against a strawman version. This is something you see people misapplying a lot, but it's a very important idea. And it's called the death of the author. The death of the author is a very dramatic name for what's really a very simple notion. Like I was saying, the work in my mind is not the same as the work in your mind. The work in your mind when you watched it 10 years ago is not the same as the work when you watch it now. The work changes depending on whose mind it's taking up residence in. And that means the work in the author's mind is different from the work in yours. That means that when the author says what the work means, they are only saying what it means to them. You are not required to agree. Hideaki Anno says that all of the Western religious symbolism in Evangelion was just thrown in to look cool and doesn't mean anything. That is true of the Evangelion in Hideaki Anno's head. It is false of the Evangelion in my head. The last point, which ties in again with Death of the Author, there is no one true perspective. You can use any of these you feel like. If you find you really like doing, there are some people who make entire careers doing nothing but feminist criticism. More power to them. There are other people who do a different kind of criticism every time they do criticism. There's some people who find particular kinds work well with one show or work or whatever, and not with others. Take whatever you want off of this, use whatever you want off of this, because none of them is the one true perspective that's right.